Well, Kathy, with all these adventures you've had, bad weather, have you really struck some bad weather experiences that you can now look back on and say, well, probably it wasn't as bad as I thought?
Um, yeah, the worst weather that I ever had was off the east coast of Tasmania, and that was on a trip I was doing as a skipper instructor on an S&S 34. And we'd, we'd set out, I could see these low pressure systems. This is, by the way, back in before there was weather information. What you did
Yes.
back then was you'd buy the Herald for a week, line up all the weather maps, and then try and work out your own predictions as to where it was going to go. And I did call the Bureau of Meteorology there and said, look, there are these low pressure systems. What's the chance that they'll converge on the east coast? And he said, no, they won't. This one's going there and that one's going south. And they did all converge. So we had around, I don't know, for most of the night we had above 40 knots, and a very big sea had built up there. And this was, I don't know, somewhere off Flinders Island, north of there. And so we had just a storm trysail up at that stage. We had one person on watch in the cockpit at a time, but every time you open the hatch to change people, just water just came in. And but it was just like a party down below. Everyone on board loved it. That was what they'd come to experience. The boat was really sound and terrific. And the next day when the wind died down, there was this massive swell. But I look back at that and I don't think, oh, it wasn't that bad. You know, I think, yeah, that was pretty bad, because it's still worse than anything I've seen since.
And who owned that boat?
That was owned by Ros and Barry Lewis, who ran a sailing school, and they weren't able to do the return trip because Barry was in Antarctica. Ros had skippered the race but left her 5-month-old daughter while she did it. And yeah, so they asked me if I would be a skipper and instructor for that return trip.
And Barry was the son of David Lewis.
That's right, yeah.
He had a few adventures in his lifetime, David Lewis, didn't he? Around Antarctica and around the world.
Yeah, that's another level of madness. But Barry was, you know, with David in the early days and all his Pacific navigation research. And Barry's a wonderful seaman. Yeah.
And are you, with our very friendly club over the way, the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, you're involved there with Ladies of the Sea program? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, you know, like the CYC is great, but the squadron's done a real lot for promoting women's sailing, mostly thanks to Karen Goynich, I think, there and her efforts. And so the people that I knew there, I know through Making Waves Foundation. They've come here and volunteered. So I started sailing on their Tuesday night ladies' twilights. And they have a regatta every October for which the format is on-water training and coaching, and then a race in the afternoon and workshops and celebrations in the evening. So they asked Bridget and myself if we would coach this year, and that was on the back of our Hobart experience. And it was a terrific weekend, and you know, we all learned so much, myself included, because you're sailing on different boats with different people, and you're learning from other coaches. You know, people like Lisa Blair, you're going to learn stuff. Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to take you to Currawong.
Yeah.
The little Peter Joubert design, 30-footer. How did that come about, that whole program for you?
Yeah, well...
And your crew, Bridget Cannon,
Yeah.
she has been a long-time friend and crew member for you?
Oh, yeah, okay. I'll start with Currawong first. Yeah. And this goes back to during COVID, and my husband actually said to me, I think you need another boat. Oh, yeah, because I'd sold Quintet, my Tassie boat, right at the start of Currawong. This couple came along and wanted to buy her, and I had been thinking of selling her. So that happened extremely easily, and I was very, very happy with that. especially when lockdowns happened. But then my husband said, I think you need another boat. And so at that stage I was looking for a boat that I could feel confident sailing across Bass Strait in, because I wanted to go back and see friends in Tassie. So I started looking at a few Currawongs, knowing the history of Zeus 2, knowing about the builder, Jeff Baker, of all the Joubert boats. I knew it would be, you know, a boat that was up to the job if I could find one. There were a few on the market, and the one I eventually found was down in Melbourne. And she'd been based in Melbourne for many years, had no racing history to speak of apart from when she was originally built. And it turns out she is the very first of the Currawongs out of the mould. So that's why she's got the name. And so I think she's a pretty special sort of a boat. And I sailed her up to Sydney double-handed just after the lockdowns were finishing. And I was really happy with the boat and the way it handled.
And who sailed
had
with
a
you?
Bit of a friend of a friend of a friend. Because when I was waiting for... I had 2 crew organised who were terrific sailors, but then COVID erupted again, and both of them have either got a disability or a partner with a disability. And so I didn't want to put them in risk of travelling, and they didn't want to either. So we just delayed the whole thing. But then they weren't available. So I ended up sailing the first leg from Melbourne to Eden, which I'd never gone through the Rip in Melbourne, so it was a new trip for me, with a guy I'd never met. And he flew to Melbourne to get on a boat he'd never seen with a woman he'd never met, who'd never sailed that boat before. So many, many acts of fate.
Brave fella.
Oh, I know. But, you know, it all worked. So, and, you know, and another good friend out of that. So, yeah, got Currawong back up here and sorted out where I was going to keep her and all of that. And then Bridget. So one of the things that we do with Making Waves is do twilight races, which is a nice lead-in and opening for people to get involved with sailing. And Bridget has been a volunteer with, mostly on the racing side, with Making Waves for many years. And she and I had met in 1989 with the Women on Water campaign. So she wasn't in the actual crew that year, but she did more of the Women on Water Hobarts that I didn't do. So we knew about each other, but we didn't know each other at all well. And we did find ourselves racing on the Making Waves TP for a while, and then on Twilights. And so I knew Bridget's a really good sailor, and tough as. And I don't know, I think somewhere we were sitting up on the rail in the Twilight race. Yes. Just talking about it, and two-handers was a new thing in the Hobart too. And for me, it wasn't such a leap between two-handed cruising, which you do all the time, and then two-handed racing. So I thought it'd be like, yeah, two-handed, but with someone else on the boat that also wants to make the boat go as fast as possible all the time. And I think we were talking about it on the rail, and somehow the idea developed, and a few people overheard the conversation. And all of a sudden it was happening.
Became reality.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you do a GoFundMe program with that boat?
Yeah, so what happened was that we sort of, you know, it's an expensive exercise getting a boat ready for Hobart, and I'm an aged pensioner, and Bridget at that stage was still working, but she's a nurse, so neither of us have got access to massive pools of money. And so we set up a Facebook page and started posting our preparation and what we were doing. And then people started saying, look, we'd like to help. You need to set up a GoFundMe page. So that's what we did. And yeah, so we got some wonderful support just from friends, and then the networking just kept on extending. And
so that was a lead up to last year's, the 2022 Rolex Hobart race.
That's right. Yeah. So
the boat, you got the boat ready to go, and you did the
we did
the Cabbage Tree Island race as a lead up race.
Yeah.
And then off we go on Boxing Day.
That's right. Yeah, I know.
Talk us through that. How did that all go? I mean, it ended very well in spectacular circumstances, but there was a lot to go on before that. You got to Hobart, that's for sure.
Yeah, so in the race itself. So, yeah, well, I mean, in an ideal world, you'd approach the race day having been well rested and well prepared and settled, but it just was not like that at all because we were working on the preparations.
And you're living at the Blue Mountains?
And I live in the Blue Mountains, yeah. So that was very intense. So I was pretty already, it was just a mixture of tiredness, but also a lot of adrenaline going on as well. And the start wasn't bothering me too much because with the 4 start lines and all the other double-handers were going to be on our line, and we know each other, no one's going to kill each other in that. But, you know, you just don't know what you're going to be dealing with in the race, and if you're not a bit apprehensive, I think you'd be stupid. And there was some strong downwind weather, and that was the weather I was most wary of, actually, in that race. So I just kept trying to think, okay, we're just going out for a sail down the coast, and we'll see how far we go, and trying to keep away from the idea of the event that it actually was. But
right,
yeah.
So you got down the New South Wales coast.
Yeah, we did. And we actually flew down there. We had the Spinnaker up for 21 hours non-stop, double-handed, which is in fact alternating single-handing when you're sailing the boat and running watches. And we had fantastic boat speeds and with the current, and we ended up getting down to Bateman's Bay, I think, in about 24 hours. And then it was starting to be apparent to me that we were going to be down entering Bass Strait at night with this 45 to 50 knot wind forecast. And I, at that stage, hadn't had any sleep at all in the race. I just felt, I don't know if I'm up to this with just 2 of us, because Bridget did most of the foredeck work. I would be steering the boat, and I was just worried about steering that boat. You know, old half-tonner style of boats are notoriously difficult to steer downwind. And I wasn't sure that I could keep Bridget safe. That was one of it. And I'd always thought that personal injury was by far the highest risk that we were facing in starting the race. I wasn't worried about the boat, but just for one thing to go wrong when there's just 2 of you on board puts the other one in a difficult position. So I was, and just also, you know, you're going at night into rubbish weather and there's a safe port right there. And all my kind of seamanship instincts were going, this is stupid. And it was actually me that made the call to go into Bass Strait. Bridget would have very much preferred to have carried on. And she said, oh, look, I'll look after it. We'll just have a trysail up and a rest. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep. And then there's the point where you're changing from your storm jib and trysail up to your number 4. You know, that's not a good time either. And my feeling was that if I can just switch off for a couple of hours, I'll be ready for whatever Bass Strait wants to chuck at us. And so we went in there and
into Eden
and picked up a mooring. So we surfed into Eden in 30 knots of wind and picked up a mooring, had a good meal and a good sleep, and we were off again in about 6 hours. So, like, you can pause your racing, but it's just added on to your elapsed time, as you know. Yeah. So what it meant for us, which was huge, was that we were no longer competitive, because we'd been racing against 2 other little boats, Maluka and Gunrunner, and we'd beaten Gunrunner in earlier races. So just to miss out on that was really disheartening, and we were pretty down in the dumps, and particularly Bridget. It was pretty frosty on board for a day because she was disappointed.
The competitive juices were still flowing.
Well, yeah, yeah. And it's not that mine weren't, but, I don't know. Maybe I was scared. Who knows? But look, I have to say that sort of since then, and the way it all played out, if it hadn't have been for that delay, we wouldn't have finished at midnight. We ended up being part of a really good story. And if it had gone the other way and was a story of injury and rescue, the whole negative impact of that, old women can't do it and all of this sort of stuff. But, yeah, so anyway, after Eden, we set off again and had fantastic sailing, and there's big seas left over from the northerly. That all softened and we flopped around in no wind. Then it picked up again. We thought, there's a chance we could get there before midnight, Wouldn't it be nice to finish this year? And so we, just, like, we never actually stopped racing the boat at all, but we just really threw everything at it. And
worked out pretty well in the end.
We did, yeah.
So you weren't going to do this year's race, were you? And then things changed for you?
Yeah, well, it was always an open question because sort of having done the race with a stop, there's a little bit of unfinished business there. But, I think you don't really want to put those kind of pressures on yourself either. It's a bit silly. But the rig on the boat, I was not sure about because I was told when I bought the boat it had been replaced in 2016. It turned out not all of it had. So I thought, well, I'm not going to sail it to Hobart unless I get a new rig. And I didn't really have any money for that. But just through the people that we'd met and from the story that came out of last year's one, a friend put us in touch with some people who said, yeah, we'll give you this amount of money. And so the boat's now got a new rig, which means it's game on again. So even now, if we go with our 20-year-old mainsail and, cruising baggy head sails, we can go to Hobart. So.
And Bridget will go with you as the crew?
Yeah,
You're going two-handed again?
Yeah, we are, yeah. And, like I mentioned that disagreement that we had on board, but after we got to Hobart, then we went on a month's cruise around the bottom of Tassie and round to Port Davey and sailed the boat back up again. So we were together on the boat for 8 weeks, and now we want to do it again. So, something's working.
Well, you said earlier your husband encouraged you to buy another boat. I mean, reverse the roles. Husbands have said to wives, I'm going to buy another boat, and that hasn't led to a good outcome in many occasions. So he must have been, or is marvellously supportive of you.
He is, actually, hugely supportive.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it?
I'm really glad you've given me a chance to talk about that because totally supportive. Yeah. And sort of ever since we've met, we've been, we met as two quite independent people, and we got together and we're both still pretty independent, except we're married to each other and we share a lot.
No doubt he'd be very proud of what you've done.
Yeah,
fantastic.
He can't quite. He's scratching his head as much as I am, really.
Just to say why.
Yeah. No, he is. He's incredibly supportive.
Well, Kathy, it's a marvellous story. I think you're to be congratulated on many fronts. I think the work you've done with the disability group, I think, is absolutely outstanding. I mean, it can't be said enough how dedicated you have been, and how I'm sure they would understand how great you've been for them. And I think everyone here at the Yacht Club, the CYC, and around the world have admired you and the effort you've put in, and you and Bridget on the two-hander. So I wish you well in this year's Rolex Sydney Hobart race. A safe trip, I think that's the main thing. And let's hope you get in before New Year's Eve, and I'm sure there'll be a big welcome party there for you again. I don't know whether I can guarantee all the fireworks, but very good luck and good sailing, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been a pleasure.